Hi there, and welcome back. In this video, I'm just going to walk you through the branches within the respiratory slash bronchial tree. Um, from the trachea, we know that the trachea divides, it branches into the right and left primary bronchi. Okay, we're also going to see that these are called main bronchi. Okay, each of them is going to enter a little indentation on the medial side of the lung, and that indentation is called the hilum. Okay, so just the hilum, not no other terms, just the hilum. Later, we'll see a hilum or several hila in other organs. Okay, so from the right and left primary bronchi, these airways divide or branch into the secondary bronchi. We can also call them lobar bronchi because on the on the right side, we have three lobes of the lungs, and on the left, we have two lobes of the lungs, and each of these secondary bronchi actually delivers air to an entire lobe. So we're going to see that later on. I am most definitely in the lab. Okay. Um, the lobar or secondary bronchi divide into the tertiary bronchi, also called segmental. And on the next slide, we're going to see what exactly segments are and why we call these bronchi segmental bronchi. Right, and again, as I said in the last video, these airways branch and branch 23 times until we get all the way to the end with the bronchioles or bronchioles. Okay, so as we move deeper and deeper into the lungs, deeper and deeper along this respiratory tree, the wall of the airways is going to change considerably. Right, so far we have seen the airway have a respiratory mucosa. Right, in the nasal cavity, we have seen it have stratified squamous epithelial tissue. We have seen it be lined by pseudostratified columnar epithelial tissue with these big clunky C-shaped cartilaginous rings in the wall. Now let's see how the bronchi change. Okay. As we get deeper into the tree, the cartilaginous rings give way to cartilaginous plates, right? So instead of, essentially being a U shape right here, you can see, essentially we have plates, right? So you can kind of think like bricks in a building, just kind of like overlapping each other. And so what this does is it allows the airways to expand and recoil a little bit more. So just a little bit more flexibility. By the time we get all the way down to the bronchioles, we don't need cartilage at all. At this point, we are essentially allowing the wall to get thinner and thinner in preparation for having the thinnest membrane possible for gas exchange to occur. Okay, so we start out with rings, then plates, and then no cartilage at all. The epithelium changes from pseudostratified columnar to cuboidal, so getting a little bit thinner. And then by the end, we're going to see it turns into simple squamous epithelial tissue. Um, towards the end, the walls of our airways get a lot stretchier. Okay, so a lot more elastic connective tissue. Keep in mind that your airways themselves aren't like, contracting to increase in size. Essentially, your airways and the alveoli all the way at the very end, they are just kind of attached to other structures. And as our rib cage expands, so too do the structures inside. And so we need the bronchioles and ultimately the alveoli to be super stretchy to expand to several times their resting state, essentially, and then recoil back immediately. And this will be very important in actually facilitating the process of inhaling and exhaling. Okay. Also, towards the end, we get more and more smooth muscle. And again, the smooth muscle isn't to expand the alveoli or expand the bronchioles. Instead, the smooth muscle kind of acts like those precapillary sphincters we've talked about before. It can actually close up the airways, or it can relax and open up those airways. Right? So where we're going with this is our sympathetic versus parasympathetic nervous systems can produce opposite responses as usual. We can open our airways and let tons of air into our lungs and therefore oxygenate our blood more so we can run away from the bear, or we can kind of close our airways off a little bit. We don't need that much air if we're just sitting here watching this video. Okay, so the amount of smooth muscle increases as we get to the end of the tree. Okay, and so in the cardiovascular system, we called this purposeful contraction and relaxation of the smooth muscle in the wall of these in these tubes, vasoconstriction and vasodilation. Here we call it bronchoconstriction and bronchodilation. Okay? Broncho as the root for something to do with the respiratory system. Okay. All right, so let's go back to talking about the bronchi themselves. Right, so why do we name the different bronchi the different things? First of all, we talked about the lobes. The secondary or lobar bronchi deliver air to 1, 2, and 3 lobes in the right lung, and 1, 2 lobes in the left lung. All right, so you might be thinking, why are they asymmetrical? Well, don't forget that in our thoracic cavity, we have a big old heart right here. And so essentially that extra space, which could be a lobe of the lung, is taken up by the heart. Okay. The lobes themselves are further divided into segments. We call these bronchopulmonary segments. Okay, so we can see here the superior lobe of the right lung is divided into 1, 2, and 3 different segments, and so on and so forth. So these different colors represent the different segments. Okay, there are about 10 on the right and 8 to 10 on the left, and each of these segments is filled with air by the tertiary or lobar bronchi. Okay, you can tell me either one, but should be familiar with both. Okay. Furthermore, the segments are broken down into lobules. Right? At this point, we don't really name the airways anymore, but I do want you to see that each segment is broken into lobules. If we were to look at the tissue itself, it would almost look like little fish scales. Okay, we would zoom in there, we would see that individual bronchioles, right, all the way to the end of this bronchial tree, deliver air to each one of these tiny little lobules. Okay, and each one is kind of separated with a little bit of tissue, interlobular septa, so in between the lobules, septa or division or wall. Okay. Within each of these lobules, we have a couple different structures. First of all, the bronchioles that I just talked about, the first ones that the air passes into are called terminal bronchioles. And so they're called terminal bronchioles because these are the last airways that do not allow gas exchange to occur. Right, so everything we've talked about so far, the nasal cavity, the pharynx, the larynx, the trachea, all of those different bronchi, and now finally the terminal bronchioles, all of these different structures have merely been conducting air all the way to the ends of the tree. Right? That is the main purpose here, their main function. And so these are the last structures that are considered to be part of the conducting zone. It is in these bronchioles that we have smooth muscle, a lot of smooth muscle, that essentially controls the airflow into the respiratory zone. Okay, so we need to make sure that just the right amount of air is going into these respiratory structures. This is where gas exchange is going to occur. Has not happened yet. Okay, so what we see here is the ends, finally, of our respiratory tree. We can see that there's lots of smooth muscle wrapped around these airways, therefore controlling how much air flows into these final structures here. Okay. The terminal bronchioles give way to the respiratory bronchioles. We can see that there's a little bit more space kind of in between the layers of kind of the straps of muscles, as we can see here. And so we actually have a little bit of gas exchange, so a little bit of oxygen creeping across the membrane out into the blood, which would be over here. Okay, so the bronchioles are terminal bronchioles. These do not allow gas exchange. Respiratory absolutely do. Okay. From the respiratory bronchioles, we have one final set of branches, and these branches are called the alveolar ducts. These are tiny passages that allow or that end with one or two alveoli, or sorry, at least two alveoli, pardon me for that. Again, the alveolar ducts deliver air to at least two alveoli. Okay, so what the heck is an alveolus? An alveolus is singular, alveoli are plural. What I'm referring to are these little spheres here. They look like grapes. If we were to take a section through them, we would see that they are actually hollow spheres into which air is going to flow. We can see these little holes here implying that they are interconnected, so air can flow from here to this one, to this one, to this one, and so on and so forth. Each of these alveoli is surrounded, is covered by capillaries. Okay, so we're going to take a look at this in the next video. These capillaries are what, are delivering the blood to pick up more oxygen before returning it back to the heart. Okay. We can also see that there is a lot of elastin, or these elastic fibers. And so once again, the alveoli have to be able to expand a lot and then go back down to what they started. Right? So it's really important that they're super stretchy. And just one note about this diagram, it's not like these alveoli are naked. These ones just have elastin. These ones just have capillaries. The diagram itself is just showing you the different layers so that you can visualize them clearly. But in fact, the entire alveolar sac, right? So this bunch of alveoli is covered with both elastin and the capillaries themselves. The alveoli start to begin at about 6 months of development, and so they don't stop developing until well after birth. And so if you are born prematurely, sometimes you don't have a lot of alveoli, or not as many as you are supposed to have, and so that is one of the many reasons why preemies have a particularly hard time breathing and may need to be on oxygen for a while until their lungs fully develop. Ultimately, we develop about 150 million of these tiny little spheres in each lung, essentially filling the entire volume of the lung, of the organ, with these tiny little spheres. And the reason that we do that is because we need as much surface area as we possibly can for gas exchange to occur. And it is, of course, most efficient in the alveoli across that skinny little membrane, which we'll talk about in the next video, and into the capillaries. Thanks so much. One more video to this anatomy story after this.